Hi there, this is Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. I'm Ian Willoughby. My guest in this edition is Katherine Kastner. She's one of the owners of Hunt Kastner, an independent Prague gallery that's helped develop the international careers of many Czech artists. What's more, Kacha, as everybody calls her, has deep Czech roots. Her grandmother was related to Karel and Josef Čapek, and in the 1990s she regularly visited Prague. Here she was introduced to the local art scene through relatives and notable artists Pavel Brázda and Věra Nováková. And I spoke to Katherine, or Katja Kastner, for this edition of Prague Talk. Katherine, you have fascinating Czech roots. Your grandfather worked with the Czech government in exile in London during the war. And I was also reading your grandmother was related to the Čapek brothers.
She was, indeed. She was their niece.
And tell me more about your grandparents.
Well, my grandfather not only was with the Czech government in exile in London during World War II, but he was with the government in exile in London after 1948. And when he died in New York, he was still affiliated with the Czech government in exile, as much as you could say that it existed.
There was a Czech government in exile.
Yeah, well, they never give up hope. Yeah, there's always going to be someone holding the flag.
I have never heard of this.
Yeah, well, I'm not quite sure that anybody had. As a matter of fact, he was living in a Y in New York, the YMCA in New York. So that's where governments in exile, I guess, go to die. And he was a lovely man. He was a lovely man, and a great Czech patriot. My grandmother was a fascinating woman. I mean, not only was she daughter of the Čapeks, but, she was certainly a very interesting and intelligent person in her own right. Very well known during her time as a journalist. Also, fierce opponent of communism as well as fascism. She was in jail during World War II. She stayed behind during World War II because at that time, a lot of people thought the Germans wouldn't retaliate against families of government people who went into exile. So we all know that wasn't the case. And after she left in 1948, I mean, both my grandparents were put to trial in absentia, but my grandmother was the one who she was sentenced to death in absentia because she was such a strong opponent of the communist government. And they actually were more afraid of her because she had a very good way with the words, so to speak.
Well, you mentioned your grandfather living in the Y in New York. How did your grandparents get on when they moved to America?
Well, it was a process. My mother was actually the very first person to move to the States. The family, it was my mother, her sister, and her parents. That was the family they left. My mother was caught crossing the border in February 1948 when they were all sort of leaving together with some other people. They had split up in the woods, and my mother and the people that she was with, they got captured. My mother got taken back to Prague, and she got put to jail. Then her grandmother, Helena Čapková, who was the Čapek brothers' sister, took her, actually vouched for her, and then spirited her across the border into Vienna. And then my mother eventually went to London, where she met up with my grandfather, who was in London at that time. Then she went to Paris, where my grandmother was in Paris. And then she actually went to the U.S., with the Herbens, and the Herbens were quite well-known family who were affiliated with Lidové noviny at the time. So my mother was the first one to emigrate. My grandmother worked for Radio Free Europe for many years in Germany, and my grandfather was in London, and then he went to D.C. with the government in exile, and then, as I said, where they put governments to exile out to pasture, they sent him off to New York in the Y, I guess.
And your mother was a teenager when she left this country?
She was 17 years old.
And how does she describe that whole period of her life?
Just as life, I guess. That's what she knew. You don't really think about it when it's a part of your family's history as being something that's any different than anyone describes growing up on a farm in Iowa or something. It is who you are. I would say that my mother had a great sense of humor, and she always says that any times of hardship, you have to have a good sense of humor. That's a good way to get over it. But she had a very much sort of like, let's, get along with it.
And she called you Kacha.
Everyone calls me Kacha.
Did you have much Czech at home growing up from your mother or from your grandparents?
Unfortunately, no. We never lived in the same city. Other than the short time in London, the short time in Paris, The whole family never lived again. My grandparents didn't live again together. My aunt was sent to a special school in the U.S. eventually, in London in the U.S. So that was a bit of a tragedy, is that that family split up for good, and everybody went their own ways for various reasons. I remember meeting my grandfather. I do not remember meeting my grandmother. I think I was 1 year old when she died. And I do remember we had a few Czech words that were, part of our family vocabulary, but my mother didn't teach us Czech growing up because my father was a U.S. Navy pilot, and we were in the U.S., everybody speaks English. And she said it just wouldn't make sense. There was nobody around. It would have just been an alienating language that nobody other than the children could speak. I also think she was quite young. She felt that it was very important for her to assimilate. One thing that she did say is that she really didn't want to end up like some of the Czech community where they would just sit around and complain about how good things had been. As I said, she had a very much, let's just get on with it attitude to life. So I didn't speak Czech, but I was known from an early age as Kachinka, which then changed to Kacha. And that's what I've been known for my whole life.
When did you first come to this country?
When I first came to the country, it was 1970. I was 10 years old, and I came with my mother, my sister, and my grandfather had just recently died. And one of his last wishes was to be taken back and buried in the family cemetery in Kojetín. So that was the very first time I came, yeah.
Also, I was reading that you came here quite regularly in the 80s.
I did. After 1970, I came again on my own in 1980. I was studying in Paris. And I came for the summer I don't know, not for the whole summer, but I don't know, for a week or two. And then between 82 and 84, I was living in Vienna, and I used to come quite a lot. Then I moved to New York, and then in New York, I was traveling a lot to Europe for my job. And so whenever I could, I would come visit, because I said I was quite close to our family here.
And how was it visiting from the West?
Well, back then, Americans were very popular. Yeah, that sort of took a dive after in the 90s when we sort of invaded. And of course, I was quite exotic at the time. So I remember I have a cousin, Kacha, who's a year older than I am, so around my age. So this was also, fun because I had someone my own age to hang around with, and she showed me around and to her friends and everything. Yeah, the family ties are quite strong. So as I said, I really enjoyed to come visit.
Your mother's cousin was the painter, very well-known painter, Pavel Brázda, and he was married to another significant artist, Věra Nováková. Did you spend time with them?
Yeah, they're very important people for me. Really, the people who, I always had an interest in the visual arts, but, thanks to them and their contacts, and, that was just sort of the obvious. I immediately became involved in the visual arts when I came to the Czech Republic.
Was it the case that you were here around the time of the revolution or during the revolution?
I was here I came here for a visit in 1989 in October with some friends of mine from New York and Paris. They had said to me, Kacha, next time you go to Prague, next time you go to Czech Republic, tell us, because we'd really like to go. We've never been to a communist country. I said, okay, well, I'm going to go in October, and if you want to join me, please do. And that turned out to be October 28th. And they came, and I remember some were flying in from London, and one of my friends flying from London, she said she arrived at Soběslavska, which is where the Brázda lived. That was Helena Čapkova's original house, a family house. And it was all in an uproar, and we were talking about people had been, Pavel and Věra had been one of the people arrested and put on those buses and then bussed off and then let off around midnight, and then everybody was trickling back and full of euphoria. My friends to this day still remember that with just such great awe that they came during a revolution, a velvet revolution, thank goodness.
So did it feel inevitable that you would move here after 89?
I think so. I always had this sort of like European, I was one of these Americans that just, was drawn towards Europe. And I think at that time I'd been living in New York 8 years, and I'd already was thinking about maybe going back to work in Europe. And then the revolution came. And so for me, then it just kind of became an obvious jump to come here.
And what were you doing during your initial period in Prague?
I didn't look back on it now. I just came, I just kind of packed up and came. When you're young, you just sort of like, you can do anything, I guess. You don't really think about what you're going to, I'll figure it out,
But you were working like for NGOs or something? Was that right?
I started, when I first came, I guess my first job was Ženský domovy, which was a cultural center. It only existed for 1 year. It was a concert hall, exhibition space. They would have poetry readings. It was in the Ženský domovy in Smíchov. yeah, I mean, that was sort of my first job. But then I went on, and I ended up working for, mainly, my whole time here has been working for nonprofits with an arts-related bent.
Well, 2 decades ago, you and Camille Hunt created the Hunt Kastner Gallery. What was your vision when you set it up?
I think our vision at the time was to provide another kind of platform that didn't exist for visual artists in the Czech Republic, both exhibition, but also something that would be a little bit more sustainable economically, both for the gallery, but also to provide an economic base, for the artists. So at that time, having worked in so many nonprofits, seeing that, there was just so limited money and everybody was really kind of either working for just minimum wage. The artists basically were working for free. And there had been some commercial galleries, some private spaces that had existed, but they tended to open and close and open and close. And we, at that time, felt that, we should try to set up a private gallery that was sort of a little bit based maybe on a Western model in terms of representing artists over a longer period of time, not just sort of like, showing and then selling, showing and selling. But helping them build their career, but also trying to get them some international recognition, because we also realized that, the Czech Republic is very small. The market was sort of really non-existent for the contemporary art that, we were sort of interested in working in. But I think at the same time, we also didn't have any super great expectations, because it was a time really that was a little bit of a desert. The institutions weren't really functioning very well. There were a lot of small nonprofit spaces, but it was just artists showing to artists. And as I mentioned earlier, the collector market was very small. It was based basically, collectors going into artist studios and buying things very cheaply and, figurative painting.
And how did it go in the first few years?
I mean, I would say it's very hard. I definitely wouldn't want to do it over again. I look back on it now and I go, oh, thank goodness. We started with very, very little. I remember our first year, our budget was $500,000 for everything. And I think we made maybe 2 sales in the Czech Republic, and they were both to expats or something.
Were you seen as kind of outsiders by the local art community?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think, it depends what you call the local art community, because, we're quite well known by I had been working with Czech artists for a long time, and Camille was also known. So I think certainly by the artists, we weren't considered as outsiders. But what we didn't have in the beginning, and we knew this, we didn't go into this, thinking that we had everything figured out or we were in a necessarily strong position. But what we didn't know were the collectors. So I think maybe the collectors who didn't know us saw us. But I think collectors at that time also, and maybe in institutions also, just didn't know how to deal with private galleries, didn't know how to deal with commercial galleries. So it was a sort of a suspicion overall, not necessarily that just because we were foreigners, but just generally that a private gallery, a sales gallery, was something to be maybe kept at arm's length.
When you talk about helping Czech artists to develop their careers and to make a bit of a splash internationally, how do you do that?
Well, first of all, you have to reach out. You have to be proactively reach out. And I think one of the problems was that in the Czech Republic, life here is lovely. So people don't really necessarily feel the need that they have to make an effort to reach out across, maybe say, borders. But we knew that this was going to be necessary. And we started by going to art fairs. I mean, that was what you did then, and you still do to this day. You go to art fairs, and this provides really, it's like a trade show, really. It's not any different than a trade show, but you go out there and you meet as many people as you can within the profession, and you present your goods, your artist's work.
And who have been your most significant artists?
All our artists are significant, all for their own reasons, It's like all children are special. And I think it also depends over 20 years, things have changed. We started with a group of artists who were born in the 70s. And at that time, they were our contemporaries. At that time, they were young artists. And we were a young gallery, and that made a lot of sense. And thanks to our artists, I said that we had success more or less from the beginning. I mean, it was a long haul. It's always, building up, developing a sustainable gallery over a 20-year period. Now, these artists who we started working with, they're already the older generation. They're the ones that are in the schools or teaching the younger generation. And they're already, kind of uber established. And it's interesting to be part of that process. But we work with artists all the way from, I think our youngest artist is Dominika Dobijášová. She's from Brno. I'm going to say she was born in 1994 or 1996, all the way up to, we started maybe about 10 years ago, also working with much older generation artists that maybe not even alive anymore. Most recently, we had an exhibition and we were presenting work in Brázda by Olga Karlíková, but we've also shown Zorka Saglova, nebo Dalibor Hatrny, because we feel it's really important sort of like provide the full context, not just necessarily of one generation, but sort of defines the whole Czech cultural scene.
I must confess, I don't know a lot of the names of the artists you work with, but I do know at least one name, Eva Koťátkova. She's very well known right internationally.
She is very well known internationally. She, quite young, became, I think right after she graduated from school, she received the Hlopecký Award, but at the same time she also was invited quite soon thereafter for the Lyon Biennale. And this is, these international exhibitions, curated exhibitions abroad are such important platforms. Eva also had the benefit that she's also working with she started working with an international gallery in Berlin, Meyer Rieger. And up to that point, this is another reason we wanted to build a really strong Czech gallery, is that up to that point, if a Czech artist wanted to have some success internationally, they really had to be represented by an international gallery. And we thought, this is really a shame, is that, we really should have Czech galleries out there presenting Czech art as well. And that, it's not just about supporting the Czech artists, but it's also about supporting, the fact that we can also, not that Czechs have to depend on foreigners, galleries for their success.
This year you took part for the first time at the Art Basel main gallery section fair. Mm-hmm. How significant was that for you?
Yeah, it's significant. It's considered, quite a step up. To be part of the gallery section, it really takes sort of staying power, and you really have to sort of prove yourself of many years of programming and showing. So in this sense, we do feel like we could kind of give ourselves a pat on the back that we managed to make it that far. So many galleries don't. You start off in the younger group, you start off in Lista. And if I look at a lot of the artists that we showed in the very beginning when we started doing art fairs, and we started in Basel and Lista, so many of them don't exist anymore. At the same time, I would also say that it's not necessarily as important part of our program as, our exhibitions or our other fairs or our work with our artists. Or, as I said, it's nice to be there. And I think Basel is still a really important platform. But, it is just still now a small bit, percent of what we do, the work we do.
I was reading also that sometimes you are reluctant to sell to some would-be buyers, for instance, Russians.
Well, we try to be very thoughtful about where we sell the art. We also do this in discussion with our artists. Every artist is different. Some of our artists, don't want their work to go to a certain type of collector, even to a certain place. It might not be personal. It might not be political. It might not be... And we always have sort of a discussion if this is an institution or this is a person where we want to send this. We want to place it in some place that, we know it's going to be safe and it's not going to disappear into a black hole. And I think that there's always, in the art world, you go through every single decade or maybe half decade, there's some boom with some sort of, like I said, it was the Russians more, maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, the Russians were all over the place and they were buying art and everybody was great. Then it became the Chinese. Now it's moving to the Middle East. And I'm not saying that these regions are not good collectors who are really doing good things or taking good care of the art. But I think it's, you want to be careful that, it's not going to just end up some black hole, that the collector's not going to end up going bankrupt, putting it out to auction, or you're just going to lose complete control of it. So we do very much want to know who we're selling the work to.
And will artists sometimes prefer to see their work going to institutions than to individuals?
Absolutely.
Because of prestige or because people will see it? Maybe?
Again, because it's there. The institution is going to take care of it. That it's there. They're not going to, it's not going to end up at an auction house. They're not going to, or just disappear into an attic. And yeah, hopefully it will be shown to the public. That's the idea. So yes, absolutely.
What have been some of your most significant institutional sales or most prestigious museums where your artists' work have ended up?
I think, the Tate and the Pompidou. The Pompidou's been great. Pompidou has been actively collecting Central and Eastern European art. Tate maybe a little bit less so. MoMA collects, some institutions in Chicago. But I think most heartening really is the past few years is the Czech institutions have started collecting. And this has only started in the past few years, maybe the past 5 years. And this is really, really important, especially for, we work with Czech artists, but the Czech artists, that their work is going into the Czech institutions.
My final question, Kacha, is what does the future hold for Hunt Kastner?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, we're just going to we'll just keep going on. Nothing is static, So, and sometimes I wish that after 20 years, you could just put things on autopilot. But in the art world, like in many places, is that you're always, things are always developing. You always have to rethink things. New things are coming. New ways of doing things are coming. We have a great team now. We have a super great team, which is really important. And we're going to just, kind of keep doing the best job that we can.
Many thanks indeed to Katherine Kastner for speaking to me for this edition of Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. If you're new to the pod and enjoyed our chat, why not look up some of the earlier conversations in the series and subscribe wherever you get podcasts. But for now, that's all from me, Ian Willoughby. Thank you so much indeed for listening to Prague Talk, and talk to you again very soon.